be talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody, to a Monday night edition of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody enjoyed the Mother's Day weekend, basically. We were going to do a show on Sunday. And bluntly, I texted producer Matt about noon Eastern time, and I said, I just walked the dog. Even at brunch time here on the West Coast, every restaurant was packed. Everybody was spending time with family. Didn't feel like we needed to go live on Sunday. There was no breaking news. And so I hope everybody spent time with their friends, their family, their loved ones, their moms, their wives, their whoever's, their daughters, or at least got on the phone and wished mom or whoever a happy Mother's Day. With that said, it is Monday, and we got plenty to talk about today. We talk about a jam-packed show. We are loaded to the gills, okay? We're going to start Great Osobor, one of the best players left in the portal. He is out of the portal after committing to Washington for what we believe to be a record-setting and a NIL price. We're going to talk about if anybody is worth that much money. We'll discuss that. From there, we will talk about the SEC basketball schedule being released. Arkansas and Kentucky only playing once. Greg Sankey, what are you doing, my man? What are you doing? We'll talk about some NBA draft combine stuff. Draft combine has begun. There's some interesting things coming out of Chicago, including players that are in the draft but could return to college. Who are the impact players that their decisions really hinge on this week? Oh, by the way, Bronny James officially staying in the draft. We'll talk about that. And finally, we will wrap with an interview. Haven't done any interviews in a while, but fun interview. You know, one thing I like to do on this show, really do believe in kind of highlighting people from different walks of life, but also different levels of college sports. And so my buddy Will Middlebrooks, he is an iconic kind of SoCal legend in the high school basketball recruiting ranks. Just took a D2 job in Oakland at Lincoln University. And I bring him on because I thought it'd be an interesting perspective. What is it like building a smaller school in this era? NIL, transfer portal, high school recruiting. I thought he just had a great perspective on all things college basketball, all of the things that we discuss. So we'll wrap the show with Will Middlebrooks, good friend of mine, and I think a fun basketball conversation that you will enjoy. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. First of all, if you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Go ahead, click that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure the notifications are on so you know when we go live. Oh, by the way, on top of that, make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, and Aaron Torres Pod on TikTok. All right. With that said, there is no more time to waste. It is a Monday in May, and darn it, we got ourselves a lot to talk about. So let's go ahead and let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, you already know, we have basically for about, I would say, the last, 6-7 weeks, we've been pretty heavy in the transfer portal stuff, right? We have been talking about all things college basketball transfer portal, and we're finally starting to wrap because for the most part, except for the players at the NBA Draft Combine, which we will talk about here momentarily, for the most part, most of those players are basically, they've committed. We know where they're going. We know where they're planning on playing college basketball next year. So there really isn't a ton of stuff to really talk about when it comes to the transfer portal going forward. With that said, there was one noteworthy name that was in the portal that I think a lot of people have been curious and waiting on over the last couple weeks. That is Great Osobor. He is a 6'8" center who played at Utah State last year, was the Mountain West Player of the Year, and about 4 or 5 weeks ago came out with a final list of 4 schools that he was going to choose from. Was down to Kentucky, Louisville, Texas Tech, or Washington. Well, since then, Kentucky kind of filled out its front court. They took Brandon Garrison as well as Amari Williams. So he was kind of off the table. He was off the table at Kentucky. They were not going to take him. And it really felt like over the last couple weeks, it was going to come down to a Louisville versus Washington thing. Louisville, new coach with Pat Kelsey. Washington, remember, also has a new coach, Danny Sprinkle. Where was he previously? Oh, that's right. He was actually at Utah State where he coached Great Osobor. So was Great Osobor going to go to the kind of pseudo blue blood in Louisville, ACC, or was he going to follow his new head coach to Washington? Well, I bring it up because on Monday morning, we got the answer as Great Osobor, the reigning Mountain West Player of the Year, committed to the University of Washington, giving Washington itself a marquee commitment here in this transfer portal cycle. And Danny Sprinkle, their new head coach, young guy, really kind of a bright, kind of rising star in the industry, a star recruit. With that said, though, I'll be honest. I'm just going to keep it real. We keep it 100 on this show, whether people like it or not. And bluntly, if Great Osobor had only committed to Washington, I don't know that we would honestly be leading the show with him. But we are leading the show for a very simple reason. It is because in the midst of his commitment, it came out about 9 a.m. Eastern, so 6 a.m. Pacific, Seattle time. A lot of Washington fans woke up to it. The news came with a little bit of caveat. It wasn't just that Great Osobor committed to Washington. It is that Great Osobor committed to Washington, and according to ESPN's Jonathan Givony, he had a NIL deal, which is record-setting and believed to be the highest number ever paid to a college basketball transfer and maybe a college basketball player ever, with Great Osobor, Mountain West Player of the Year, 6'8" center, transferring to Washington for a reported price tag of right around $2 million per year, to which I say that is just absolutely insane. And I think it's absolutely worth a conversation about. The exact quote, by the way, from Jonathan Givony, ESPN, Osobor will be the highest paid known player in college basketball with $2 million of NIL already in place. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about it. And let me start by saying this, okay? Why this is interesting to me is for a couple different reasons. Mainly, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the player going to be worth what he is paid by the school? And that's something that we're going to find out over the course of, again, the next couple weeks, months, years. But what I will say is that I find this fascinating because what I think it really does is it does put a spotlight on just the modern world of college athletics. And I think kind of more importantly, roster building in 2024, 2025 in the NIL era. It's not just about finding pieces. It's not just about finding players that fit. But in a world where every school, even Arkansas, even Texas, even whoever you think is spending the most in NIL money, everybody's got some sort of budget. And I just don't know if anybody is worth $2 million a year in this NIL era. So let's go ahead and get into it. And let me start by saying this, because I know what a lot of people are going to say. A lot of people are going to say, Torres, it's not your money. It's not your school. You're not paying the bills. Why do you care? To which I say, actually, I agree with you 100%. And in general, in both life and in sports, I really don't care how anybody spends their money, okay? First off, in life, I don't care how you spend your money. Listen, I pay my bills. I pay my taxes. Just got off the phone with my tax guy today. I spend my disposable income differently than you. There are, 23-year-old kids right out of school that are buying $100,000 sports cars and paying $1,200 a month in car payments. I think that's absurd, but if that's how you want to spend your money, that's fine. I'd prefer to go on a vacation. I'd prefer to do this. I'd prefer to invest, whatever. Your money, you do what you want. And frankly, it's the same in college athletics. You want to pay your football coach, you want to give him an extension after a 7-5 year where you go to a lousy bowl game. It's not my money. You do what you want. And the opposite is true as well. You want to pay a coach $20 million in a buyout? That's fine too. You spend your money how you want. Why this is interesting, though, to me, is again, because it speaks to where we are in the roster building process in college basketball. And bluntly, I'm just going to say something that will probably make me look bad and some people will probably criticize. I just don't think Great Osobor is worth $2 million per year. And again, I think it speaks to where we are. And I think it speaks to a problem that is going to creep up as we get deeper into this NIL collective era. It is that, again, is the juice worth the squeeze? And you better make sure when you're paying top dollar for these players that you get a return on your investment. Now, in terms of Great Osobor, listen, I think he is, very bad pun intended, I think he's a good college basketball player. Averaged 17 and 9 in the Mountain West last year. For people who have not seen him play or who are not familiar with his game, I keep quoting the Shaq meme. Sorry, I was not familiar with the game. Great Osobor, really good college basketball player, okay? Like I said, he averaged 17 and 9 last year. He was the Mountain West Player of the Year. What's also worth noting, he's a 6'8" center, okay? He's a 6'8" center, doesn't really defend the rim, averaged about a block and a half per game despite playing 34, 35 minutes per game. And he doesn't shoot the three ball at all, 21% from three. And so when I look at Great Osobor, I'll be honest, go ahead and look at all of my transfer portal rankings from throughout the offseason. There was never a moment at any point where I said that I believe that he was one of the best players in the transfer portal. As a matter of fact, I kind of said the opposite. Listen, by the way, I'm not here to criticize other transfer portal rankings, but I saw people in this industry saying, oh, he's one of the top 3, top 5, top 7 player. No, he's not. What I saw, honestly, was a player who, in my opinion, I think kind of found his level at the Mountain West. What do I mean by that? Remember, we had Will Wade on this show a few weeks ago, and we were talking to Will Wade about recruiting. And what he said is, look, the great thing about this portal era is everybody kind of finds the level they're supposed to be at, right? Some guys, a Reed Shepherd, a Rob Dillingham, a Steph Castle, they're clearly high major guys. They go there, they ball out, they leave. Then you have some players that go to the high major level, just aren't good enough. They transfer down for a year or two. Then you have players that are maybe, recruited to a lower level than they should be, and they transfer up. And so everybody finds their level, but I kind of think Great Osobor kind of found his level in the Mountain West. He's a 6'8" center. He doesn't have elite size. He doesn't have elite frame. He doesn't have elite athleticism. He just plays really hard, and he's really strong, and he's really physical. I don't want to sit here and say he's like sort of an Oscar Tshiebwe, but he's kind of sort of an Oscar Tshiebwe. Big, physical, tough, strong, not particularly skilled. By the way, Oscar Tshiebwe was a National Player of the Year. But you saw when he played in the SEC, there were a lot of nights that he was dominant, but there were a lot of nights where he was just kind of okay. And eventually, especially in his second year, it felt like teams kind of figured him out. And it felt like there were certain teams that gave him specific trouble. And so when I look at Great Osobor, by the way, I am not going to apologize for criticizing the player. This is the NIL era. Kids are getting paid, okay? If I can criticize an NBA team or an NFL team when they give out a bad contract, I'm going to do the same at the college level. And when I look at this kid, I think he's a very good college basketball player. But he's a 6'8" center going into the Big Ten, where guess what? He's going to have to go against Umar Ballo at Indiana. He's going to have to go against Purdue, where, yes, they're losing Zach Edey. They have 2 7'1", 2, 3 guys on their roster right now. Will Berg, Zach Edey's backup, is 7'2", and he's going to play next year. Michigan State has Xavier Booker, 7-footer. You go on and on and on down the list. These are the guys this kid is going to have to play against. And so I'm done criticizing the kid. That is my honest opinion. But what I also think it speaks to, and this is the fascinating part, this is the interesting part, this is what I always try to do on this show, is take you behind the scenes of what it's really like in college athletics, okay? And right now, I think college athletics is at a really interesting inflection point with this NIL stuff because everybody's spending money. But eventually, guess what happens? Boosters want to see a return on their investment. And so what becomes interesting to me, and this is where it gets so fascinating, pay Great Osobor what you want. It's not my money. If you believe Great Osobor is worth $2 million, that's fine. If Great Osobor commands $2 million, take that money, Great Osobor. I'm not here to criticize you. What I am here to say is that I do question is Washington going to get the return on the investment that they expect? And are those boosters in the end going to be happy with what they get? Because at the end of the day, listen, I know what I just said. It's somebody else's money. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. By the way, Washington, people probably don't realize, it does have great NIL. I heard even a year ago when Mike Hopkins was really struggling, hey, Torres, I don't know how good they're going to be, but that NIL is not an issue at that school. And I just bring it up because while Washington does have great NIL, no NIL is unlimited, and somebody does write those checks and cut those checks, and the money does come out of somebody's checking account, okay? And so when I look at it, I just look at a guy that when you are paying this kid this much, when you are paying him like he is the best player in college basketball, I think those boosters are going to expect to see something resembling the best player in college basketball next year. I don't think he's that, and I feel like all I'm doing is crushing the kid, but I'm telling you how it's really going to be. And all of a sudden, those boosters are going to look up in January, February next year like, oh, we paid for this? This is the highest paid player in college basketball. Like, imagine in the NFL, if owners didn't really know who the players were that they were signing in free agency, and a team, a GM kind of needed a quarterback and came to their owner and said, like, yeah, we believe this guy, we got to pay him, top dollar. And the owner doesn't really know who he is and whatever. And let's say it's a quarterback. And let's say it's like a Gardner Minshew or something. And you're paying him Patrick Mahomes money or Josh Allen money or Lamar Jackson money. And he ain't Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. Owner's going to sit there and say, well, what the heck just happened? And I think that's what's going to happen here. And so, again, this is what's so interesting. You can pay whatever you want, but there are consequences. And I am curious if boosters will be more hesitant to pay next year going forward if they don't get the return on their investment. And that's where it's interesting. And that's where it's fascinating, is the kind of push-pull of building a college basketball program in 2024, 2025. Listen, we all think Arkansas is the best NIL money in America. But John Calipari has had to say no to some kids because the demands are that high. The demands are too much. He just says we can't do it. Again, Kentucky largely backed off this kid because the demands were just too high. They said, we can't spend our entire budget on this kid when we could get 3 or 4 good players beside him. Producer Matt brought that up. It's like, this kid's this good. You get 3 players for that price. But I guess Washington feels like we're going into the Big Ten. We got to make moves. And this is just where college sports is today. And so I'm curious if this is kind of an inflection point. If this is a moment where if this works out, then yeah, Washington's going to push all their chips in the middle and say, screw it, let's do it again next year. But if they don't, will they reel it back? And I think that's what we're going to start to see in this NIL era going forward. I think you're already starting to see it. It's interesting. I talk to coaches all the time. I remember talking to a coach in the middle of this season, and he was saying, like, he's kind of at a not quite a high major school in college basketball, but kind of one of those like mid-major plus schools, like a Mountain West A10 type school. And he said to me, he said, like, Torres, dude, yeah, we raised X amount of money. Let's say it's $1 million. But we didn't spend all of it because we know that if it doesn't go well this year, it's going to be harder to raise money next year. You see it in football already. I think we've seen it in basketball already. Part of the reason I think John Calipari's at Arkansas is because, bluntly, I think he wasn't going to get the money from the boosters that he needed to compete at the highest level, where he gets a fresh slate at Arkansas that he wouldn't have at Kentucky. By the way, in football, I mentioned this to producer Matt before the show. I remember in January or February, we were talking about an article I saw where apparently Florida football is having trouble raising money in NIL for Billy Napier. And I told producer Matt, I said, Florida is never going to have trouble raising NIL money. They're having trouble raising NIL money for Billy Napier. They don't want to pay because he's been telling them, I need this, 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 and this, and the results haven't equated on the field. So I hope this doesn't sound like I'm just criticizing the kid, because I'm really not. And I really don't care how people spend their money. What I do find very interesting, though, is how is all of this money allocated in the NIL portal area? You push all your chips in the middle for a kid like this. It comes out that he is the highest paid player in college basketball. Again, he better play like an All-American. And bluntly, I just don't know how many kids are really worth that kind of money if $2 million is the high end. Like last year, Zach Edey would have been worth it. Dalton Connect would have been worth it. Rob Dillingham would have been worth it. Donovan Clingan from UConn would have been worth it. But the list isn't that long. And I just find this whole situation very fascinating. All right, I see the chat is already humming. A lot of questions, a lot of conversations. We'll get to your questions later on, but this is what I want to do. I do want to take a quick break. I do want to come back. When I come back, I want to hit on some other hoops news and notes from the last couple days. And where I think we're going to start is with an SEC scheduling update from today. The SEC has released its basketball schedule for 2024-2025, and there is one big game that's missing. Arkansas and Kentucky will play only once. I think it's a mistake. We'll take a quick break, respond to that. We'll be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. I do want to switch gears. Want to go ahead and hit on some other things in the world of basketball. In just a minute, we will get to the NBA Draft Combine. Doesn't have the buzz of the NFL Draft Combine, but you talk about impact that it could have on college hoops in 2024-2025. Man, oh man, oh man. Are there a lot of different players who can have a major, major impact going forward. So we'll get to the NBA Draft Combine in a minute. But I do want to kind of stay on the hoops, and I do want to stay kind of in the college realm, where we got some very interesting news on Monday involving two programs that we have certainly talked about quite a bit here on the Aaron Torres pod over the last couple months. Those two programs, Arkansas and Kentucky. And I know I've said it a million times, but I still go back to the day that John Calipari, that Sunday at the Final Four, when the rumors start to leak, when Wes Moore breaks the story, Arkansas is hiring John Calipari as its next head coach. And I remember saying it at the time. I said, listen, Kentucky fans and Arkansas fans, you guys are probably going to get sick of me talking about those two programs in conjunction at the same time. But the bottom line is those two programs are going to, at least for the first few years of the Calipari era at Arkansas, be inextricably linked. Arkansas hired Kentucky's former head coach. Kentucky has to do a coaching search. Kentucky obviously is going to learn from what they believe the mistakes were from the Calipari era. Calipari is going to bring players from Kentucky to Arkansas. And Adu Thiero, a Big Z. As we record here, we're waiting on word if DJ Wagner will be a Razorback. Those guys might be in Fayetteville for another 2 or 3 years. So the bottom line is that these two programs are going to be tied for a while. So I bring it up because this has now become a great rivalry that wasn't really necessarily a rivalry before this. All you got to do is check the comments section during one of these live streams. It turns into hogs versus cats, back and forth, yelling at each other, whatever. Anytime I post about one on social media, the other fans comment and get in my comment section say, we don't care about Cal, or we love Cal, or, Kentucky fans say there's hope in Pope. Arkansas fans say there's no hope in Pope. So you go on and on down the list. These two programs are inextricably tied, and I believe it's going to be a great rivalry going forward. So why are we talking about it today here on a Monday Night Aaron Torres pod? And it's because on Monday, the SEC actually announced its SEC basketball schedule for the 2024-2025 season. We don't have official dates of games, but one thing that did come out on Monday was which teams are going to play each other and where they're going to play, and of course, who is going to play each other twice. Now, with the SEC going to 16 teams next year, adding Texas and Oklahoma, it means that you're only going to play 3 opponents twice, and we found out who both Kentucky and Arkansas are going to play. In a world where I think we all kind of agree we should probably have Kentucky, Arkansas playing twice at least next year, it ain't going to happen. Kentucky's 3 home-and-home matchups are with Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Bama, and Arkansas's are with Missouri, Texas, and LSU. Let me say this. The SEC League office does not get very much wrong. I think Greg Sankey is as smart and as sharp and as whatever as any administrator in college sports. That goes without saying. I think they understand the branding. I think they understand big games. I think they understand matchups. And I think they've done a great job with the football stuff, with the way that they've handled that football schedule, which is going to be a bear in 2024. But I bring it up because from a basketball perspective, I'm here to say this. Greg Sankey, shame on you. I love you, buddy. But you completely whiffed on this. What are you doing? How are we not getting Arkansas and Kentucky twice next year? Instead, they will just play once at Rupp Arena. Now, in terms of this, let me start by saying this, because I know what people are going to say. Well, Torres, there's 2 new teams. There's only so many teams that can play each other home and home, okay? So I get it. I do. But remember, I think we even talked about this on the show. But John Rothstein, I believe, was the first one to put this out, is that the SEC with expansion, there would still be 3 home-and-home games every year. 2 would be permanent, and 1 would be what they call a mirror opponent, which is basically the league can just pick whoever they want to be your 3rd home-and-home, okay? And so any year it can be anybody. And so clearly the SEC has decided that Tennessee and Vandy are going to be Kentucky's 2 permanent opponents, at least for now. And next year, it's going to be Alabama. And to a degree, I guess what I would say is I sort of get it. By the way, I believe Arkansas, it's going to be LSU and Missouri, and then Texas is going to be kind of, we'll see what happens, et cetera, et cetera. And I might not be right on that Texas one. I know I am on Kentucky. But with Kentucky, I get it. Tennessee, Vandy, you play every year. You've played every year since this league basically began. And with Alabama next year, Alabama might be the best team in the SEC, probably will be the SEC favorite going into 2024-2025. And so the way the SEC looks at it, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. Kentucky's the biggest brand with the most fans, most eyeballs on TV, and Alabama's coming off a Final Four and is the SEC favorite going into 2024-2025. So in some ways, I get it. I'll even take it a step further. There was a chance that this was all decided before Calipari even left for Arkansas. So I sort of get it. But just because I get it doesn't mean it was the right decision. And if this was decided before Calipari left for Arkansas, even if it wasn't, somebody in the league office, sometimes in life, you just got to step up. Somebody's just got to kind of raise their hand in the back and say, guys, I know Alabama's going to be good. I know Texas and Arkansas would be interesting, old Southwest Conference rivals, whatever. But yeah, we got Calipari versus Kentucky. How are we not getting that game twice? Somebody needed to step up in the league office and say it. Because at the end of the day, let me say this. College hoops, I actually think, does a pretty good job of putting together schedules and games. I think especially in that early November, December timeframe, there's always a good game on every single night. You have the Champions Classic, Kentucky, Duke, Kansas, and Michigan State. You have all the Thanksgiving tournaments, the Maui Invitational, the Battle for Atlantis, this new one in Vegas with the NIL money, which we talked about the other day. You have the now ACC SEC challenge. You used to have the ACC Big Ten. Now you have the ACC SEC. You have all sorts of intriguing games early. So for the most part, they do a pretty good job. But this was such a slam dunk no-brainer, and especially at this moment in time in college basketball, in college sports. Because when I look at it, I'm just going to say this. I don't know, if we're being perfectly honest, like how many great rivalries there really are left in college sports, because the players change and the coaches change and everybody's changing all the time. And I just don't know how many are really left, okay? Like when I look at, college sports right now, like even Duke and North Carolina, like I hate to say it, but even Duke, North Carolina, I feel like it's kind of lost a lot of its juice over the last couple of years after Coach K retired, after Roy Williams retired, okay? We're losing Arizona, UCLA. That's no longer a conference game. Gonzaga has no real rivals, St. Mary's sort of, whatever. You just go on. There's just not a lot of great rivalries, but this was one that was like, oh, we got to set our calendars for this. Calipari returns to Rupp Arena, and then Kentucky has to go into Arkansas with Calipari on the other sideline. That would be insane. And so to me, this was such a no-brainer. And I just don't, I can't even think of the reason why the SEC wouldn't want to do this. It makes no sense as far as I'm concerned. You want the biggest games, the biggest brands, the biggest opponents. By the way, I don't know why the TV partners didn't step in, because think about it. Either SEC, either CBS or ESPN isn't getting Cal versus Arkansas. And so to me, it brings up two very interesting questions now that we know that we're only getting one game. First of all, shame on the SEC because we should have had two. But I think the two conversations that are interesting to me are this. I had people ask me, hey, Torres, what do you think the reception is going to be like for Cal when he goes to Rupp Arena for the first time? How bad is the booing going to be? Now, Kentucky fans, I see a lot of you in the chat. I would love your perspective on this. I could be way wrong, and I could be way off base, but I think Cal's going to get a reasonably good reception. Because didn't Cal kind of do you all a favor? Didn't he do Kentucky fans a favor? Like, first off, gave you 15 great years. In the last 3 or 4, they were not up to the standard that he set. But at the end of the day, he brought you a national championship, brought you 4 Final Fours, brought you a bunch of SEC regular season titles, a bunch of SEC tournament titles. And I know that it got too about the NBA over the last, the totality of the era. But it is still pretty cool to turn on an NBA game and, Jamal Murray was a former Wildcat. Karl Anthony Towns was a former Wildcat. PJ Washington balled out this week, and every team has a former Wildcat. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the runner-up for the MVP. So he brought you a lot of good. So I don't think that's going to be a factor. But didn't he also do you a big favor? Like, isn't also part of this the fact that John Calipari did Kentucky a solid because he left? He saved you $33 million. You didn't have to fire him. You could start over fresh. You could get the coach that you wanted. And most importantly, not only get the coach that you wanted, but you also can learn from the mistakes of the Cal era. So all the things that you did not like about Cal, change with Mark Pope. Get somebody who gets the program, somebody who gets the state, somebody who isn't going to make it all about the high school All-Americans and the NBA players. So I could be totally wrong. And again, I'd like to see some comments in the comment section. Tell me if I'm crazy. I don't think it's going to be like this angry, hostile crowd. I think for the most part, people are probably going to be grateful that this guy left what he did and allowed the program a reset without bankrupting it for $34 million, $33 million. Now all that money's going to NIL. Now all that money's going to making sure Mark Pope has the best staff that he possibly can. So I'm not sure the reception will be bad. But what I'm also curious about is something I just said. I'm curious about when the game is played and where, like from a network perspective, that it's on. Because you talk about a game that the networks are going to battle for. Now, I don't know if they do like the draft the way that they do for college football. So for people who don't know, college football, like the Big Ten, right? So the Big Ten splits its rights between Fox, CBS, and NBC. And at some point, it just happened, I believe. Fox, CBS, and ESPN, or Fox, CBS, and NBC all sat in a room and basically said, okay, this is our whole inventory of games. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Remember, Oregon, Washington in the Big Ten, Oregon at Ohio State. Michigan at Washington is a game next year. And they all sat in a room and they kind of draft the games that they want. So I'm curious, when the SEC basketball draft comes next year, who gets that game and when is it? Because if they were playing twice, my assumption would be that one of the games would probably be on like an ESPN Wednesday night game, like Carl Ravitch, Jimmy Dykes. And then the other one is probably the last game of the regular season to wrap SEC play. You think back to this year, Kentucky, Tennessee. Kentucky plays Tennessee early in the year. That was actually a Saturday night game. And then they finished the year playing in Knoxville on CBS. And if you're CBS and you want to build momentum for the NCAA tournament, tell me a bigger game that you can possibly have to close out the regular season than the only regular season meeting between Calipari and Kentucky at Rupp Arena on CBS in late February, early March to get you ready for March Madness. Now, of course, ESPN's going to have a say. I wonder if it becomes one of those Saturday night college game day games, but I am fascinated to see what that game is, what the number is. We've talked about, what the viewership totals may be. Absolutely fascinating. But let me also say this. I think the SEC dropped the ball on not making this a twice a year game, at least for the first couple years. All right, let's go ahead and wrap really quick. By the way, I did mention this off the top. My buddy Will Middlebrooks, kind of a, in my opinion, a legendary high school basketball coach in the state of California. He just took a D2 job at Lincoln University in Oakland. And I want to have him on. I thought it'd be a fun conversation to have. What's it like taking over a D2 program in this era, NIL transfer portal, also being a high school coach, the high school recruiting element of it. It is a very fun interview. I encourage you all to check it out. It will be after this segment in just a minute. With that said, let's wrap. And one topic I do want to get to before we get out of here, and we'll take a few questions before we get to the interview, but I do want to talk NBA Draft Combine, okay? Now, the NBA Draft Combine does not have the buzz of the NFL Draft Combine. Nothing in basketball does compared to football. That's okay. The NFL is a monster. But at the same time, the NBA Draft Combine is very interesting because unlike the NFL Draft Combine, if you show up at the Combine, you're in the draft. There's no testing. There's no going back. There's no maybe I'm going pro, maybe I'm staying, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that. But with college basketball, it's actually the exact opposite. Is that the NBA Draft Combine, the best players really don't even do that much at the Combine. We saw it on Monday. They might do a vertical leap or a shuttle drill or whatever, but they're not playing 5-on-5. They're not doing all the stuff that everybody else is doing. And so what ends up happening is the Combine no longer is about the Reed Shepherds, the Rob Dillinghams, the Donovan Klingons of the world. It's actually about the guys that have not yet decided if they're coming back to college or not. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And a guy like Mark Sears at Alabama, a guy like Jackson Robinson, transfer from BYU, who could go to Kentucky, maybe go to Arkansas. You go on and on down the list. There are just a lot of very intriguing names at the NBA Draft Combine. So let's go ahead and get to some of the news and notes really from Monday and throughout the week. And I also want to tell you the big names that are there that could have an impact on college hoops next year. So first of all, let me start by saying this from the perspective of players who are already in the draft, or at least stuff that stood out from day one, okay? By the way, should even mention, Sunday we had the NBA lottery announcement. I think the NBA kind of knows how bad this draft is going to be because they put the lottery on Sunday afternoon on Mother's Day. I can't imagine very many people were watching, but it's interesting. The Atlanta Hawks get the number one pick, have no idea what they're going to do. There's rumors they're going to trade Trae Young. So what does that mean? I think most people think the French kid, Alex Sarr, his brother Olivier Sarr, obviously played at Wake Forest and Kentucky. I think most people believe he's going to be the number one pick. But we'll talk about the NBA draft as we get closer. But the Combine is interesting. Couple notes from Monday afternoon. First of all, Reed Shepard athletically is testing off the charts, okay? And so Reed Shepard, we talked about him a ton. We don't need to relitigate everything about him. But he was obviously an All-American at Kentucky this year. One of the few players I think was worth the Great Osobor check that Great Osobor got today. But Reed Shepard was awesome. Goes to the NBA Combine, and he's testing off the charts. Saw that he had a 42-inch vertical leap, which was the highest vert of anybody at the Combine. His shooting has been insane in kind of one-on-one workouts. Now, I don't even know if they've started 5-on-5 yet. He will not be participating in that. But this is a kid. I still wonder if he ends up being a top 5 pick. I certainly think he's going to be a top 10 pick, but he was really about as good as you could have been. Again, he's not going to compete in super high level stuff. He doesn't have to, bluntly. But his testing was off the chart. I thought he was awesome. Thought it was also interesting. Alex Karaban from UConn. He's one of those players that really right now we're trying to figure out, is he going to stay or go? He's UConn's 5th starter. The 4 other starters have all declared for the draft and are staying in. Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer are out of eligibility. Donovan Clingan and Steph Castle have declared with agents. They're not coming back, okay? But Alex Karaban is the one that, as of right now, might actually be coming back. But based on what he did earlier in the day, I don't know if UConn fans should feel very good about the idea of seeing him play college basketball next year. Alex Karaban, according to Jonathan Gavoni from ESPN, who is there, I saw him tweet this out at about, let's see here, it was probably about 4:30 Eastern time. He said Alex Karaban caught fire in the three-point shooting drill, hitting 14 straight threes, 21 of 25 overall, by far the best figure at the NBA Draft Combine. Also tops off in the dribble shooting. And I bring it up because this is a guy, listen, I believe in my heart of hearts that he is going to end up staying in the draft. I know UConn fans are going to be mad at me for saying that, but he's 6'10". He's a better athlete than people give him credit for. The only reason he didn't put up monster stats for UConn this year is because the team was really good and they had a lot of options. So he's shooting the crap out of the ball. He's 6'9", 6'10", whatever he is. I think I said 6'10". He's probably closer to 6'8", 6'9". Got great positional size, great athleticism, shooting the crap out of the ball. And I just don't think you see many guys that are 6'8", 6'9", who can shoot the way that he can. So my hunch is that realistically, I would guess he's probably going to stay in this NBA draft. We'll see. Dan Hurley's been pretty adamant that as of right now, if he's a first-round pick, he will and should stay. If he's projected as a second-round pick, come back. UConn will take care of him in NIL and be the star of next year's team, be a first-rounder. Worth noting, I think I have UConn at number 3 or number 4 in my way too early top 25. If Karaban stays in the draft, I think it's hard to keep UConn in that top 5. I believe in Dan Hurley, but they would be replacing all 5 starters off a national championship team. Couple other players who are at the combine. Let's talk about guys that could return to college that I just want to keep an eye on. And we'll talk about the guys that are committed to a certain school, but then also guys that could still be in the portal and make a decision. In terms of the guys that are still committed and still, we know where they're going to come back to college if they come back. Caleb Love is at the combine. Obviously, the Arizona guard, he has the 5th year of COVID eligibility. And what's interesting was, I was around Arizona a lot during the month of March. I was with them at the Pac-12 tournament. I was with them at the NCAA tournament in Los Angeles. I don't think there was real thought that Caleb Love was going to return at all to college basketball. But if he's going to be a second-round pick, he'll make NIL money. He'll be a star at Arizona. And remember, Arizona's going to the Big 12 next year. And so, in my opinion, if he's probably not trending to be like a first-round pick, I think there's a very good chance he could come back. And I don't think he is going to trend to be a first-round pick. Now, the interesting thing there for Arizona, they have a deep freshman class. There is a couple players, Josan Sanan, who was a 5-star reclassified kid. I've heard my buddy Mike Luke, who covers Arizona, say that if Caleb Love comes back, he thinks there could be some shakeup in that recruiting class. So now does a 5-star recruit become available in mid to late May if Caleb Love comes back? So there's a lot to discuss. That's very interesting. Obviously, the other big name besides Karaban, besides Caleb Love, Mark Sears at Alabama. Listen, I've said it consistently. I think if Mark Sears comes back, Alabama is my number 1 team in the country next year. Elite guard, not great size, not great this, not great that, but man, can he shoot the crap out of the ball. It was interesting talking to the UConn guys at the Final Four, the players after the game. They were like, good Lord, was that kid good? That was the best guard that we saw all year. So bring it up. If he comes back, I think Alabama has a case for the number 1 team. If he does not come back, I still think they're good, but I don't think you can make the argument that they're number 1. Their point guard probably becomes Aiden Holloway at that point. Of course, the transfer from Auburn, who I think right now going into next year would probably be better as a backup than he would be as a starter. But that is an interesting name to follow. Also, Johnny Furphy, the kid from Kansas. I think everybody thinks he's going pro, but he has not technically officially left his name in the draft. That is an interesting name to watch. And then I think the other interesting names, give me a second here. Let me grab some water really quick. Interesting names who could come back, but are in the portal. Now, this is where it gets interesting. These are players that could return to college basketball. Will they, if they don't have a good performance, do they end up coming back? First of all, Chaz Lanier. We talked about him on Friday's show. He is the guard from North Florida, averaged like 21 points per game. What was interesting, keen Kentucky fans noticed that Mark Pope was at the combine and was kind of front and center for all his games, basically saying, hey, if you come back to college, we really want you to come play college basketball for us next year. So Mark Pope was at the combine watching Chaz Lanier. I would put Kentucky as a favorite right now, right alongside Tennessee, but I'd probably make them the favorite if he comes back. Jackson Robinson is at the combine. He, of course, began his career at A&M, played at Arkansas, spent the last 2 years at BYU. In my opinion, I do think he probably wants to stay in the NBA draft. I think if he was really keen on coming back to college, he just would have done it by now. He's not going to be a first-round pick. Could have followed Mark Pope, could have made a lot of money. So the fact that he's going through this process, I think to me probably means that he wants to stay in. He's looking for any type of assurance. And if he does, obviously that has big impact on college basketball. If he does come back, I do think that Kentucky should be deemed the favorite. Now, one of the questions that we got, apparently Arkansas behind the scenes is trying to make a little push for him. I have not heard much about that, but I think it's obviously interesting. He played for a year at Arkansas under Eric Musselman. It did not work out well. But at the same time, I would still think Kentucky is a favorite there. A couple other names, Jalen Wells is a name to know. 6'8", played at Washington State last year. I think he's really good. Don't know what his intentions are, but he is in the transfer portal right now. I think he becomes one of probably the 10 best players to enter the portal if he returns to college hoops. And then obviously a guy that we have talked about quite a bit, Coleman Hawkins. Remember, Coleman Hawkins is the player from Illinois who entered the portal, decided to test the NBA draft waters. Another one, I think he wants to stay in the draft, but as we've discussed quite a bit, I think he's more keen on coming back to college basketball than maybe I thought. Worth noting, he actually graduated from Illinois on Sunday. Saw some pictures with him and Brad Underwood. Congrats to Coleman Hawkins on being a college graduate. If he comes back, I think that becomes like a Louisville, North Carolina type recruitment. I don't think he's coming back to play at Illinois. All right. I think that's it for the news and notes from the NBA Combine, except for one big one. And so I want to go ahead and get to this. Producer Matt, if we have any notable questions, go ahead and grab them. But there is one more name from the NBA Draft Combine, that is at least worth noting. That is the name of Bronny James. All right, so Bronny James found it very interesting because there were two pieces of news that basically came out concurrently on Monday as it pertained to Bronny James. Bronny James, the son of LeBron James. First of all, there was an interesting note that he had been cleared by the doctors at the NBA doctors. So basically the insinuation, of course, is remember, this was a guy that, we don't have to beat around the bush. He had cardiac arrest. It was a very scary situation. We're obviously glad he's okay. And he put his name both in the portal when Andy Enfield left and into the NBA draft at the same time. Well, he was cleared by doctors, and almost immediately, as soon as he was cleared, Shams or whoever put out the report that he is, in fact, staying in the draft. And so I want to dive into it. I want to get real, and I want to be honest. I think in the case of Bronny James, two things are true. Absolutely, positively, do not think he is ready for the NBA, but I also think he is such a unique circumstance that bluntly, I don't think this is the worst spot for him or the worst decision that could possibly be made. And I know what a lot of you are going to say, oh, how can you say that? Bronny, in 1 year at USC, averaged 4.8 points and 2.1 rebounds per game. How can you say that it was the right decision for him to go to the NBA? Well, I think it's completely unique. I think it's completely unique to him. And so let's quickly dive into it before we get to questions from the audience. Okay. So in terms of Bronny James, listen, let me just be quick here. One, and by the way, let me just be clear. We have honest conversations on this show. We don't attack people. We're not angry with people. We're not jealous of people. But I'm also not going to sugarcoat things to protect people either, okay? And so Bronny James right now is not only not a first-round pick, bluntly, he wouldn't be drafted if his father wasn't LeBron James. By the way, that's not his fault. As I've said on this show many times, Bronny was never a high-level prospect for the class of 2024, okay? I brought this up a few months ago. I think it was right after he declared, okay? Because, no, you know what it was? I can tell you exactly when we brought this up. It was when ESPN made the big thing about, oh my goodness, he has fallen out of the top 10 for the 2024 NBA draft. And what did I say at the time? This is not a criticism of Bronny. But the truth is, he was never a top 10 prospect ever, okay? I hate to be a jerk. I hate to be rude. I don't like to criticize other people in the media, but there was only one outlet that had Bronny in the top 10. It was ESPN, and it was Jonathan Givony. I'm not here to criticize. I'm not here to this. I'm not here to that. But what I can tell you, when that came out, to use a bad pun, it was mocked in the media. And it was very clear in media circles that ESPN put Bronny in the top 10 for one of two reasons. It was either to make LeBron and Clutch Sports, obviously Rich Paul is, of course, LeBron's, childhood buddy who's now an agent. It was either to make them happy or it was to drive clicks for the mock draft. Because if you have Bronny not in your mock draft, it's not going to do as well as if you have him in the top 10. So when he was listed in the top 10, nobody took that seriously in basketball circles. I said it at the time. Bronny was the 28th ranked player in his high school class. That's not bad. But at the end of the day, if you're the 28th best player in your high school class, in what world, especially when you're a 6'3", 6'4" guard, are you a top 10 pick the following year? Now, if you're 7'1" with a 7'7" wingspan and you're projectable, maybe. But 6'4" guard, 28th ranked player. If you're the 28th ranked player in your class, how are you a top 10 prospect? Just think about it. It doesn't even make sense, okay? Because if you're the 28th best player in your high school class, what happens when you factor in 3 other classes of college players? You don't think there's any players that are better than him that are sophomores, juniors, seniors? You don't think there's international players that are better than him? So it never made sense. He was never a top 10 pick. That was a joke in media circles, and it's not a criticism of Bronny. It's a criticism of ESPN for putting him there in the first place. But at the same time, do I think this is the worst decision for Bronny? I don't. And it's for a couple reasons. One, right or wrong, his dad clearly wants to play with him. Now, I think it's a little bit of narcissism on his dad's part. I think his dad's about my age. We all grew up on Ken Griffey Jr. A lot of people that are under 20 don't remember. The kid, Ken Griffey Jr., was the biggest athlete in sports for a time when Michael Jordan retired from basketball, okay? And so Ken Griffey Jr. played with his dad in the big leagues, and LeBron has always wanted to play with his son in the same way. The difference is Ken Griffey Jr. was a stud coming out. He was the number 1 overall pick. And so with LeBron, why I can't criticize Bronny's decision is, 1, LeBron clearly wants it to happen. 2, I believe Bronny's going to get drafted no matter what. But 2, I don't know that returning to college for Bronny specifically makes sense. First of all, the number of teams that would even be interested in him, I think, is pretty minuscule. I'll be honest, that's not a criticism. But I haven't talked to Coach Muss about it, but I don't think Coach Muss at USC wants him. Andy Enfield, the coach who recruited him, left. He's obviously not following Andy Enfield to SMU. And so what are the other options for him? Because we've talked about it a million times before. When you bring in Bronny James, you know what that means? You have to, you can't bring in Bronny James to be the 11th guy on your team. You have to bring him in and put him in a position to succeed. You have to bring him in and put him in a position where he's going to play. I just don't know how many high major schools are willing to do that and willing to bet on him, knowing that he's a 2 or 3 year project. And so, yes, he could go to a lower level, but he's not going to go to a mid-major school. I saw people suggest go to Duquesne. LeBron's high school teammate is a college coach at Duquesne. That's not going to happen. And then I think the other thing is you also have to factor in the infrastructure that is needed for Bronny. I remember talking to the USC people about this, a year ago at this time. They were like, we're perfect for Bronny because we're close to the family. And USC is kind of a school, and this is going to sound arrogant, but it's not intended to be. USC is kind of a school that's used to high profile students, right? Caleb Williams a year ago. Caleb Williams isn't just walking around campus going to sociology class. I'm sure he probably did most of his classes online. I'm sure they had security, whatever. Children of actors and actresses. One of Obama's kids just graduated from USC and they had secret security following them around. So I just bring it up because there's not a lot of great options. And there's not a lot of great options that can basically deal with the Bronny James infrastructure. And so I think the realistic best plan for him, go pro, develop. Now, at some point, you're probably going to get called up so you can play with your dad. But even if you're not, go pro and develop kind of out of the spotlight. If you're Bronny James and let's just say you go to Duquesne, what if you average 11 points per game at Duquesne next year? You're still not an NBA draft prospect. Then you fall even further down the list and you're an even bigger, I don't want to say punching bag, or punchline, because that's not how I feel the kid is. But it just takes you that much further away from the goal of playing in the NBA. So whether I think it's right or wrong, I do think he'll probably be drafted. It'll almost certainly be by the Lakers. Now, I could see somebody sneaking in and trying to draft Bronny to hold it as leverage over the Lakers. That I don't know. But he's going to get drafted. And he'll get a cup of coffee in the NBA next year. And then after he plays with LeBron and LeBron has his little moment where he can make it about LeBron, then Bronny can go back down to the G League and develop. So that's my Bronny James take. Is he ready for the NBA? No. Is he one of the 60 best players? No. But is he probably going to get drafted? Yeah. And is this the worst decision for him? I don't think so. All right, let's quickly get to some questions before we get to Will Middlebrooks from Lincoln University. Producer Casey. So we talked about Great Osobor to lead the show. Producer Casey asks, Pope choosing Garrison over Osobor was a good move, financial move. Brea, Creasa, Chaz Lanier if we get him, and Ansley Alomar, lock, average in the 96th percentile of catch and shoot. So we talked a lot about Great Osobor to lead the show. And again, I feel like this is Torres being critical of 18, 19-year-old kids. That's not what it is. Wasn't critical of Bronny. It was just the truth. And I'm not going to be critical of Great Osobor, but it's the truth. Is that, I think Casey's right on this. You could have spent your entire NIL budget on Great Osobor. That's, no pun intended, great for Great Osobor. But you're trying to put together a team that can compete. And here's the other thing. You're Kentucky. You don't have to. Maybe Washington, and we didn't talk about this during the segment, but maybe they feel like we have to put together a budget. Maybe we have to make a big splash in NIL because we're going into the Big Ten, because we're going into a better league. But if you're Kentucky, you don't want to spend your whole budget on one player. And obviously, if the $2 million price tag, by the way, here's the other thing that Casey doesn't mention, and this isn't a criticism of the question, it's just a fact, is that if you had waited this whole time and not taken the commitment of Brandon Garrison, guess what ends up happening? You wait. You're frankly probably going to get outbid for Great Osobor, or you're going to have to overpay, which is what Brian Kelly was talking about last week, by the way. And instead, now you don't have to worry, and you got a player that you like in Brandon Garrison. If you had waited for Great Osobor, there's a chance you miss out on him, or you overpay, or you're scrambling to find another big man. So I think Mark Pope handled it perfectly, and I think this is part of portal recruiting. I remember talking about this a lot when Eric Musselman was the head coach at Arkansas, and John Calipari kind of dragged his feet in the portal. I said, this isn't high school. You can't wait forever. You have to make split snap decisions really quick. And for people listening on audio, I apologize for snapping right into the mic, but you got to make snap decisions. And you can't wait 2 weeks or 2 months for a kid unless it's a Hunter Dickinson, unless it's a whoever, because you might end up missing out on everybody else. You don't have 6 months to find the next guy. You got like a week. And so Mark Pope had to make a split decision. Are we waiting on this? Brandon Garrison is in the hand. He wants to commit here. He's ready to go. And Mark Pope, I don't even think I know he's done a lot of interviews. I don't know if he's talked about this, but I don't think it was a very tough decision for him. He was probably like, this kid wants to come now. This other kid is going to take 3 other visits and the price tag is crazy. Yeah, I'm ready to move on. What else we got, producer Matt? Jacob, great question. Torres, if you had to bet on how many Huskies get drafted, how many do you think? I'm thinking 3 or maybe 4. I think 4. So let me say this. Klingon and Steph Castle are going in the top 10. I think Tristan Newton gets drafted. I just don't understand how you have a 6'5" guard that can shoot, pass, pretty good athletically, can run the team, can play off the ball, can defend, has positional size. I don't understand how he doesn't get drafted. I don't understand how he's not on mock drafts. So I think he gets drafted, and I think Karaban stays in the draft. I hope I'm wrong. By the way, I just checked my phone during the commercial break. I got UConn fans hitting me up. He's gone. I think Karaban's going to stay in and get drafted. The one I'm not sold on is Cam Spencer. I like Cam Spencer. Great all-time one-year Husky. But he's 6'4", not super athletic, not a great defender. You really need a Donovan Klingon type behind him. So Cam Spencer's going to play in Summer League. He's going to have a shot to make a roster. I don't think that he's going to get I don't think he's going to get drafted. So I would say 3 to 4. And I think Karaban, if he stays in, does get drafted. It's just a matter of whether he wants to stay in and whether he's happy with where he lands. Any other ones? Is Carr going to be a starter? So we're talking about Andrew Carr, the Wake Forest transfer, who of course has committed to Kentucky. Yeah, I think he's a starter. 6'9", 6'10", and he shoots the ball really well. And when you look at the Kentucky recruiting class, if you want to call it that, with Kentucky, like, they're big guys. Neither of them shoot. Amari Williams doesn't shoot. Brandon Garrison doesn't shoot. So you're not playing them together. I guess in theory you could go small. But yeah, I think Andrew Carr was absolutely brought in to start at the 4 because he plays that Mark Pope system. 39, 40% three-point shooter, can stretch the floor, protects the rim a little bit for a guy his size. Not a great rim protector, but he can. To answer the question from John, is Andrew Carr going to start? The answer, in my opinion, is absolutely yes. For producer, great question from Jacob. Does Alex Karaban's decision impact Jalen Stewart or Liam McNeely more? I would say probably Jalen Stewart. Jalen Stewart's awesome. Had that big stretch in the Big East Championship game. He scored like 9 points in like 4 minutes against Marquette. I don't know if UConn probably wins the Big East tournament without Jalen Stewart, but they might not. And so I only bring it up to solely say he was a very important cog, and I think he's going to be very good next year. But he's got to work on that three-point shot. I think he's got to develop a little bit more. I think Liam McNeely's coming into play and get out because Liam McNeely ultimately wants to be a one and done, wants to be in the NBA. And if you want to be a 2, 3, 4-year college guy, he's not, if that was the pitch from UConn, he's not going there. He would have gone to Kentucky. He would have gone to Kansas. He would have gone somewhere else. And so I think he's coming in. I don't think a starting spot was promised to him, but my guess is that he's going to be starting. I think especially if Karaban's gone, he's one of the focal points of the offense. So I would say if Karaban returns, I think it impacts Jalen Stewart more. But I would say if Karaban leaves, it probably impacts Jalen Stewart more because he probably will get more playing time. A couple more, we'll get out of here. Casey, I do listen religiously, but also worth noting, Chaz played very poorly at the G League Combine. He is a lock to come back. Also, Poplar, if he comes back, will have a visit likely. Yeah, Casey brought up a good point. Some of these guys at the NBA Draft Combine are playing well, like an Alex Karaban, and I don't think they'll come back. Chaz Lanier did not look good. And Chaz Lanier, listen, he's a unique story. Basically didn't put up big stats for 3 years in college basketball. Comes back this year at North Florida, the Ospreys, and averages 21 a game after averaging like 6 as a junior a year ago. So why I think about that is he's probably not an NBA draft prospect. That's okay. The fact is he's probably going to go to Kentucky or Tennessee. He's going to come back to college, make 6 figures, and play on one of the biggest stages in college basketball and have a career that nobody thought was possible 18 months ago. So Casey does bring up a very important point. Chaz Lanier, who Mark Pope was in Chicago to see on whatever day it was, Sunday, did not play well early. And while he's still testing, I think by the end of this week, he's withdrawing from the draft. He's not a draftable prospect, in my opinion, right now. And then I think it becomes an interesting Tennessee versus Kentucky battle. And all of a sudden, boom, we got something to talk about next week. for producer. Jackson Robinson is maybe second round. Why stay in the draft? Okay, this is a great question. We have to remember, everybody, I was talking to a coach today, right? And we were talking about, he was an assistant coach and he was a head coach and he decided, you know what, I'm going to go be an assistant coach somewhere else. Rather than be a head coach, I just want to be an assistant at this point in my career. And he said, if I was younger or if I hadn't been a head coach, then I probably wouldn't have made the same move. But why he said it was everybody's path is different. And so with Jackson Robinson, what we have to understand, guys and girls, JC Wilder asked this question. I know we make everything about the money. And I think in Great Osobor's case, it was absolutely about the money. And that's okay. It's okay to make things about the money. People make decisions outside of college sports every single day based on money. But not every decision in every walk of life is solely about money. And so I think what Jackson Robinson is sitting there looking at is I can come back to college and I can be on a bigger stage and I can probably make more money. And maybe in a year from now, I'll get drafted higher. But I've played 4 years of college basketball. I've played at 3 different schools. My guess is I think he's probably graduated. He might just want to move on and not play college basketball. Think about this time last year. Drew Timme had an extra year of eligibility. Drew Timme would have made more money playing at Gonzaga than he did as a pro this year. I don't even know where Drew Timme is right now. But he wasn't an NBA draft prospect. I don't think he got drafted. But he was just like, dude, I'm done with college. I've done it for 4 years. I've made 4 Sweet 16s and a Final Four and played for a national championship. Like, I'm just ready to do something else, do something different, do something new. And I think if you're Jackson Robinson, 3 schools in 4 years, you got the tape that you needed to show what you kind of can do. And if you're ready to move on, that's fine. Now, again, maybe the opportunity to play for Mark Pope is too good. Maybe somebody comes over the top of Kentucky, wink, wink, Arkansas, and the money's so good, you just have to come back to college. But some guys are just ready to move on to the next chapter in their careers. I can't blame them for it because, again, not everything's about money. Not everything's about prestige. You played 4 years of college basketball. You don't want to go to class. You don't want to study. You don't want to have to go to study hall. You just want to make it all about basketball. I sort of get that too. Any more, producer Matt? We'll do one more, and then I think we will go to our interview with my buddy Will Middlebrooks. All right. Will Kentucky wait for Jackson Robinson or Chaz Lanier or possibly both to UK? Yeah, I think Kentucky's absolutely in wait and see mode. I already have them. We talked about this on Friday's show, by the way. I already have them in the top 15. So I find it interesting that a lot of these top 25s, way too early top 25s, don't have Kentucky in the top 25 because I think Jackson Robinson moves them up a peg. To me, it moves them up from like, I still don't know that they can win a national championship next year, probably. But I think they're probably around somewhere between 10 and 12. I think it moves them up a peg, okay? But I see people that don't even have them in the top 25. And I'm not criticizing people that do this for a living besides me. But if you don't have them in the top 25 now, Jackson Robinson maybe makes them a fringe top 25 team. I don't think he puts them over the top. And so the question is, do you wait for them? Yes, absolutely. Because at this point, there's only so many dudes left in the portal that are impact players. But I just don't know that at this point, these guys make that much of a difference. All right, I'll tell you what. This is what we're going to do. So I said this to lead the show. Good friend of mine is Will Middlebrooks. He's a legendary high school basketball coach in the state of California. I coached Orlando Robinson, who's on the Miami Heat right now. Tyler Bay, who was a Pac-12 all-conference dude who got drafted by the Mavericks. And he recently took a job at Lincoln University in Oakland. And I thought it'd be fun to have him on because, listen, we talk the highest of the high major stuff, right? We talk about the impact of, we talk about the impact of the portal on a Kentucky or an Arkansas where, you're recruiting the portal. You might be recruiting 5 guys the entire offseason. Now, this year's different, obviously, because Arkansas, Kentucky, they need bodies. But, Kentucky in a normal year under Calipari was recruiting maybe 5 guys total in the portal. Well, what do you do when you're a D2 school? You're recruiting mid-major guys, low-major guys, probably D3 guys, NAIA guys, everything in between. So that's interesting. How does NIL work? Oh, by the way, how does high school recruiting work? So Will Middlebrooks is a great friend of mine. We have him on the show. By the way, we wrapped the conversation. He sent kids to play for Mark Pope at BYU. He sent kids to play for Pat Kelsey at Charleston. I think he certainly knows those guys. So I kind of bounce off, hey, tell me a little bit about some of these coaches. So we're going to throw right now to my buddy Will Middlebrooks, head coach, D2 Lincoln University in Oakland. And again, I think he not only has good insight onto the recruiting process, et cetera, but also to Mark Pope at Kentucky, Pat Kelsey at Louisville, et cetera. Here's my buddy, Will Middlebrooks, head coach, Lincoln University. So we love kind of, having people from all levels of basketball on this show. I mean, obviously we focus so much on the big brands and all that stuff, but I love talking to people from different levels, all that. And a guy that I have known for years, Coach Middlebrooks, I always tell the story. First time I met you, walk in the gym. You already know where I'm going with this. You point to the corner. You said, see that kid over there? That's my next NBA guy. And I always say, it's about 6'5", 6'6", super skinny. No disrespect to the kid, but I did not see it. Ended up being Tyler Bay, draft pick, Dallas Mavericks, all Pac-12 guy, Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. And so ever since then, we call it the Middlebrooks touch here in Southern California, but he's now the head coach of Lincoln University up in Oakland. Long introduction, but Will Middlebrooks, what is going on, my man?
Hey, man, good to be here, bro. I had the same argument with a couple other people about Orlando Robinson on the Miami Heat. So people didn't believe me about that either, but it's all good.
Yeah, we had Orlando on last summer during Summer League. And so Coach Middlebrooks was the coach at Cathedral High School in L.A., Orlando Robinson, Tyler Bay, among many others. So tell us, okay, so Lincoln University. So you've been coaching high school here forever. An opportunity presents itself at the college level. What makes a coach who is, a legend here in Southern California? What makes you interested in pursuing that college opportunity?
Well, I mean, time, creates interesting opportunities. I'll say it that way. So over time, I never thought I would actually coach in college, but the setup of Lincoln, the AD is a tremendous guy. Gary Payton laid a huge foundation that's excellent. And I can see within my purpose, which is to create as many opportunities as I can for young people through the game of basketball. I could see myself continuing in my purpose, because everything for me is being purpose driven. So I don't feel like it changes. It actually expanded a little bit. And also with our community focus, the fact that it's intentionally a business institution, I feel like I can put business degrees in a lot of kids' hands, which creates some transformative change in communities around the country. I think that all coming together made it make sense for me. Yeah, on top of the fact my prep team did beat 3 college teams this year.
Okay, all right. No, and I was going to say, maybe I should have even backtracked. Tell us a little bit about Lincoln University. You mentioned Gary Payton, the legend, the glove, Hall of Famer, was the previous head coach. It's up in Oakland. I probably should have even led with that, but tell us a little bit about the school and the university.
The university is 100 years old, founded in 1919, so a bit older than 100 years old. It's a business school that historically served international students. Their enrollment was right around 95%. They started the athletics program 3 years ago. They want to have a more domestic, more diversity. So to bring in domestic kids and youth sports is one of those tools. It's ranked number 15 in the state. Their MBA program is ranked number 4 in the Bay. So, I mean, they have a phenomenal product. And they have a digital imaging program where 100% of the graduates have gotten jobs. So the school itself is phenomenal. And so when you mesh that with basketball and the sports space, I think it's great for kids.
Let me ask you a dumb question, because, we talk a lot of portal on this show, especially this time of year. And, we talk about it from the Duke, Kentucky, UConn perspective of, except for a year when the Kentucky coach leaves and there's no roster, They're skimming off the top. They're probably recruiting. They have a board of like 10 guys total, and they're probably going to get 2 or 3 of them. What about at your level? Because I always think about this. I asked, Preston Spradlin, who was at Morehead State, I asked him how he put together his roster. Because it's like, I just feel like when you're at a smaller school, it's everything from, probably high major kids that didn't quite make it at that level to NAIA kids that are overqualified. How many kids are you evaluating right now when you're putting together this roster?
For me, we've got like over 200 kids on the board.
Wow. Okay.
So, and then we've got to wait for the big guys to take what they're going to take, and we'll get down. But remember, this is a market where only 4.5% of high school students actually end up playing college basketball. So when you look at it from that space, there's a huge base of kids. And then when you add in the international piece, that drops you from 4.5% to about 3%. So, and when you do elite basketball, so the stuff I do at Compton Magic and being in that space, you get to know all these kids.
Sure.
So many of the kids in the portal will already know, have relationships with directly and indirectly, know the guys that are with them. So for a school like mine, we'll just wait and we'll get the best of what's left. So now that being said, I'll tell you, Kentucky's kicking butt. I mean, Mark is my guy, AB3. Now they got Jay Hart down there.
That's my guy, yeah.
So I texted them all. I said, I'm kind of, even though I'm gonna wear burgundy and gold on the side, I'm gonna wear a little of that blue and white.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that staff in a minute, because being in SoCal, I got to know Jay Hart really well, and I probably said some things about Ignite that weren't the best things to say, but it had nothing to do with him. It was just I didn't like some of the coverage and how it pertained to college basketball. But Jason knows I think the world of him, and I know Coach Pope very, very minimally. We'll talk about them in a minute. But see, so what you just said is really interesting. Okay, so you come from the high school ranks. You kind of mentioned it for people who don't know. You do stuff with the Compton Magic, or previously had done stuff with Compton Magic, which is maybe the best AAU program in the country. Evan Mobley and Yeka Kongwu, Johnny Juzang, the list goes on and on. So, you mentioned the business degree, and we always look for, untapped markets in things, right? Moneyball, the concept of Moneyball is, hey, we have to, Oakland A's had no money, so let's get creative in how we evaluate. Is high school basketball the new Moneyball, where it's like there's just so much talent? Go ahead. For people who are listening on podcast, the face lit up, and I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I mean, high school guys can get NIL, and that changed everything. So the landscape is different. And then you add in the prep schools that have come into play. Now you look at Nike partnered with the one organization, I forget the name off the top of my head, but the prolific preps of the world and Oak Hills and them. So it's that whole space is changing. And I think, unfortunately, traditional high schools are going to take a backward step. You're going to see more and more of these national programs opening up. Arizona Compass Prep, trying to think.
But in high school, but from a college coaching perspective, I just feel like everyone's so focused on the portal that, to the point you were making a minute ago, a lot of really good high school players are falling through the cracks, right?
Oh, without question. Because college coaches, even at the JUCO level, they all want to get older.
Wow.
They do have a pressure to win. Yeah, I talked to one JUCO coach. He told me the average age of his roster right now is 22.
Wow.
And that's junior college.
Sure. That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's just where the whole market is going. And, there's pressures to win, and older rosters tend to do a little bit better just because they're a little more seasoned. Doesn't mean that their prospects are better, because from an NBA perspective, the younger guys are the better prospects.
Sure.
So it's a catch-22 in terms of how all that works. But for certain, colleges want to be older. They want to be more mature, and they're going to live in the portal. Last year, we saw during live period, coaches weren't even coming out because they had portal guys on campus. So this year, in the spring during the live period, there's only one live period for high school. Wow. So for high school guys, it is tough. Now, I will say what will happen is, coming up here, is the COVID year kids and some fifth year guys. There'll be 2 classes that exit college at the same time. So when that happens, there'll be a little more breathing room for high school kids.
So yeah, and that's really interesting. I saw Sean Miller put out a clip. Well, his team put out a clip of him talking about how right now, today, in May or this portal cycle 2024, 25% of the kids in the portal were guys that had an extra year, a COVID year, basically, to use. So 25% of the portal is going to be eliminated this time next year. Let me ask you a question, because you're kind of on the precipice of both of these things. Is that you were a high school coach, so you saw it from that perspective, but now you're a college coach recruiting a balance of portal, high school, international, as you said. Take us through the balance of, and it could be you at your school, it could be Mark Pope at Kentucky, it could be Mick Cronin at UCLA, of, like, it's tough because I see it from all perspectives. First of all, as you said, you got to win. But then you look at it and you see it from the coach's perspective of, if I recruit a kid and I don't play him, he's going to leave. But then there's also the kid's perspective, which I don't think enough people talk about. I had a high school coach mention this to me, is if I send my kid to this school and he sits on the bench, well, what if the coach leaves? What if the coach gets fired? Then he has no stats. Then where's he going to transfer to? And so he encourages his kids, hey, make sure you're going somewhere where you're going to play, not because, you're selfish or anything like that, but because if something happens, you need to have tape to show other schools if you have to get back in the portal. So the only point I'm trying to make is that it just feels like a really delicate balance from all accounts. And I'm just curious, take out the elite of the elite, where we know a VJ Edgecombe, a Cooper Flagg, they're going to be able to go where they want. But like the ecosystem for high school players right now, because again, coaches don't want to take a kid that wants to sit, but then the kid, I understand their perspective as well. I just think it's an interesting conversation,
Yeah, it's tough, because the harsh reality is you got 13 scholarships and 7 or 8 guys are playing.
Yep.
So that's, if you take away the portal, take away all the other discussions, the reality is there's going to be 5 to 6 guys who just don't play unless injuries happen, lack of eligibility, something to that effect. So that's always been a juggling spot. What's made it different is the NCAA is basically giving kids immediate eligibility, and you can just transfer. So that's the major change, that it's a free for all. And I think for colleges now, I think college coaches have to walk into these deals and year to year and look at it as collaborative.
Yeah.
And I think they need to be transparent, because if your guy 8 through 13, you need to tell that kid where he's at. You need to tell his handler, because he's going to have a handler. You got to tell his AAU coach. Then you got to tell his parents. Then you got to tell the high school coach. And you're going to have to also make sure they understand, look, I'm going to help you move, because I know you're going to get mad and you're going to move. And they're going to have to operate from that perspective, because that's just kind of where it is. I think on the player side, they have to be more strategic. So if you're not sure you're going to play, go lower.
Sure. Yep.
Right. Or if you feel like, I'm not going to play, but I just want to get better and develop, go higher than you should. Because the reality is, if a kid goes to Texas Tech and doesn't play, Cal State Northridge is taking that kid out of the portal.
Sure.
That's going to happen. So you'll be able to drop down and play, and you could use a year to get better, go to the right program. NBA scouts are coming to your practices, so you're getting auditioned for them. So I think the kid has to be very strategic. And also, now you're talking NIL, if you go to certain schools, even if you're not playing, if you go to a high enough school, they're paying you $100 to $250 to sit and be a great practice player and a great team guy, which may be the most money you ever get. So it might not be bad to go there for a year, take the money, get a good financial planner, stack that money, let it compound interest, and by the time you're 50, you'll never have to work again.
Well, and here's the other thing too, is that and this, I think we're going to see more of, unless the rules change. Like you said, guys, it's a free for all. Stack that money, then transfer down, get your stats somewhere, then transfer back up for your 3rd, 4th, 5th year.
Yes.
and it's so interesting in, being around this every day. I'll just give you an example where I don't think I'm speaking. Let me put it this way. Really good player in the SEC, transferred in from a low major, and the staff that recruited him at the low major was like, "We think you're a high major guy. Come here, ball out. We're going to help you get to that next level." Where I'll say this is, I think there's a lot of hand wringing from people in the media, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. If you disagree, please tell me. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of hand wringing from people in the media that aren't as plugged in. And I hate to sound arrogant, but like, I talk to people every day, and I think there's this hand wringing. Oh, it's so unfair to the schools and the coaches and the this and the that. I think most coaches by this point, maybe 2020, 2021, it wasn't this way. I think most coaches kind of get that it's exactly what you just said. It's a year-to-year thing. We reevaluate at the end of every year. We had Will Wade on this show about a month ago, and he said everybody's a one and done coach now. It's a one and done, and I ship them up. I ship them from McNeese to the SEC. The SEC ships them from the SEC to the NBA. Do you think that that it kind of, at least for now, under the rules that we currently have, it is what it is, and everybody accepts it? Because you hear all this negativity in the media of, oh, it's so this and it's so that. And I don't think it's necessarily great for the kids or great I don't think it's great for the sport as a whole, but it is what it is. And I think the coaches, the players, the handlers, as you said, I think everybody's kind of adjusted to this new world, maybe better than they get credit for.
Yeah, I think people see, they don't. I was just having this conversation yesterday. They don't think about reality. So
Sure.
I was at an event and the speaker wanted to talk about the importance of the team. You hear Barkley talking about winning, this and that. Well, look, players get paid based on stats.
Sure.
So the money is based on stats. Opportunities are based on stats. Then you get mad at the kid because he's a stat chaser and not a team guy. They're mad at people who are transferring, but why are they transferring? They need stats. Because the reality is, most of these kids, whether it's realistic or not, have an NBA dream.
Sure.
And the parents have invested a ton of money. They've been traveling all over the country doing grassroots. They're doing this because they genuinely have a desire. Maybe they're not good enough, don't know how to do it, whatever, but they do have a desire to get to the NBA. So the mentality from that player side is there. The other thing I was telling the guy is, a coach can just take a new job tomorrow and leave.
Sure.
So coaches have been able to bounce around all they want forever. So why shouldn't the player be able to? So I don't really believe it's unfair. I think it's uncomfortable for people because we're creatures of habit and we just like to see things. But the game, the basketball game has changed forever. Like, nobody's talking about Lou Alcindor couldn't play varsity basketball in college as a freshman, right? So Kareem basically took the JV team and beat the varsity team at UCLA in the sixth because he couldn't play varsity, but the game changed. Now all of a sudden, freshmen could play. So there's always going to be change in the game. There's going to be rules and there's reasons why those changes are happening. I personally embrace change. I think NIL and all of these things create a lot of parity. It creates a lot of opportunity. And I think now you're seeing lower major teams beating higher teams, because they get this group of older players. So I like it. I think it's good for the game because I think you don't know who's going to win now. There's a lot of parity, and you just can't. Kentucky's going to definitely win the national championship. Those days are over. It could be anybody.
Can you imagine the bidding wars for Lou Alcindor? Be amazing.
Oh,
be amazing.
My God.
All right, couple quick things. We'll get you out of here. First of all, so Lincoln, take us through. What are the first steps? Right. Again, and I hate to keep reiterating the same point, but when Pat Kelsey takes a Louisville job, when an Eric Musselman takes a USC job, when a John Calipari takes an Arkansas job, we get to, there's 20 people covering that team, and we see, hey, Muss offered this guy, John Calipari offered this guy, Kentucky has that guy in for a visit, blah, 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 blah. At your level, and I hope it doesn't sound disparaging, but there's just not as much knowledge of how it works. But you're doing the same thing. You're filling out a roster, you're meeting with prominent alumni, you're getting to know your administration. So what is it like at your level to take over a job? And is it any different than what a Pat Kelsey and Eric Musselman, a John Calipari and Mark Pope are doing?
It's not, but then it is because we don't have the same resources. So now I'm doing the job of 5 people,
Sure.
whereas if I was at Kentucky, they'd have 5 different people
Sure.
doing those jobs. But functionally, everything's the same. So you got to fundraise, you got to schedule, you got to get players. You have to grow your brand. So all of the things are for the most part the same. It's just the level of player that you have.
Very good. So do you have a normal schedule, or is it like we got Zooms? And by the way, if you have to, I don't know how long I have with you, but how many Zooms a day are for recruiting? How many texts a day are for scheduling? Is it just full speed ahead? Because as you said, you don't have 3, 4 coaches to work with. You don't have a private jet to get on at a moment's notice. Is it just, nonstop pretty much, I would assume?
Oh yeah, this is an 80-hour work week.
Sure.
But for me, low key, it was the same thing in high school. So I'm a hoop junkie. So, I'm having fun the whole day. So it's fine. But it's definitely, yeah, I mean, it's all day, every day on the phones, in the gym, here, there, boom, boom. It's all day.
No, and for people who don't know Coach Middlebrooks, that was one thing I always enjoyed about being around your high school program was it was run like a college program where you had you had a social media presence, you had a YouTube channel, you had a podcast, you had this, you had that. So maybe that not that much has changed. You mentioned really quick, Coach Pope, Jason Hart again was at USC forever. I don't think he and really the entire Andy Enfield staff gets enough credit for what they did while they were there. I think it was 7,
Yeah.
8 NCAA tournaments. 2020, they were trending as like a 3, 4 seed before the tournament was canceled. They had one and dones. They had 4-year guys like Jordan McLaughlin, who's still in the NBA. So you mentioned, Coach Pope a little bit. For the Kentucky fan listening, tell us a little bit about him and maybe a little bit about his staff too.
High energy guy that's going to really get it done. Super high energy. He can relate to the players.
Because he played at
So
a high
that,
level.
yeah. And I mean, he played there. So, I mean, he's an alum coming home. So I think that's going to be exciting. I think their style of play will be exciting. And I think that the support staff he has, I mean, with Jay Hart and Alvin Brooks third, like they're going to get really good players and they're going to do a phenomenal job.
So let me ask you that because I think that was the concern when Mark Pope came in is, he's not going to be able to get elite players. Well, first of all, heard from Kentucky fans for years that they want the balance of the older players, the developmental players, whatever. But tell us a little bit about those assistant coaches that maybe people don't know as much about.
Yeah, I mean, well, Alvin won the national championship at Baylor, right?
Sure.
And he helped really build that team. Him and Coach Tang, who's head coach. And you see, even with Coach Tang jumping over to Kansas State, immediate impact in winning because he was a great assistant. Alvin's going to bring that same kind of energy to Kentucky. Jay Hart, I mean, he's worked every level. I mean, he started at Taft High School, then he went to college, then he went to Ignite, and he was a great player. And so he's going to bring all of that and ton of skill set development and that whole thing to Kentucky. Again, relates very well to kids. So they're going to be a very relevant staff that is going to organically attract people. Plus, the Kentucky brand is it's strong. I mean, guys want to play at Kentucky, But again, it is about the opportunity. If I go to Kentucky, I'm trying to get to the league. So what is my pathway to get there? Well, these guys can help them with that part of the process as well. So it should be good. Should be good.
What about Pat Kelsey? You know a little bit about him too, the new Louisville head coach.
Yeah, I know Pat. They'll do a good job. They're grinding away, and a couple of guys have called me to help out with some stuff that they're trying to get done. I think Louisville, again, strong brand. Um, we've had a lot of players play at Louisville. Ellis was there.
Well, Orlando Robinson was
Boy,
recruited
guy.
pretty hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Orlando was recruited by them. Yeah, so that's a phenomenal situation too. So uh, Pat will be able to get it done. He'll handle it. Now, when Kentucky and Louisville play, hey, it is what it is.
Real quick, I don't know how if you know this guy at all, but do you think Cal's got a lot? Calipari has some juice left in the tank for Arkansas.
Yeah, I think that Calipari, and again, I don't know him extremely well. I had some dealings with him because he recruited Tyler Dorsey is when I really talked to him. Talked to him a little bit over the Johnny Juzang situation, but not much. But from what I do know about him, he wants to coach future pros.
Sure.
And I think that becomes the challenge for the college fan if they can't understand that. Because the reality is guys who are going to have good careers in the NBA when they're young are still going to lose college basketball games simply because they're young. So I anticipate him continuing to recruit the way he recruits, which is young kids who are true NBA prospects. I just don't know that leads to a national championship the way that one group did with Anthony Davis and those guys. So, because older players are just older. Because, I mean, when we talk about older players, we're talking about 24, 25-year-olds,
sure,
some with wives and children. I mean, these are grown men. And so when you're 18 and 19, you're still 18 and 19. Ton of upside, but you're 18 or 19.
Awesome. Will Middlebrooks, head coach, Lincoln University in Oakland. Dude, I'm so glad we did this. I think the listener learned a ton because, it's one thing for me to just yell into a mic about some of these topics, but somebody that lives it every day and has lived it every day for so many years. We appreciate the time. We'll be following.